California just passed a lot of new ADU rules that are going to make it easier to build an accessory dwelling unit, whether that's a house in your backyard or converting part of your home into an apartment. For example, just to give you a little taste, there's now a shot clock. So if the government takes too long to get you your permit and they don't take that shot and tell you whether you've got it or not, you can hire a third party to come do it all for you. All right, now we're going to see if I can actually make anything happen here on camera. I know that third-party Plancheck is extra tantalizing, and you're probably very impressed with my basketball skills. But before we get to the shot clock and how to hire third parties, I want to talk about the year in general. There are several new ADU laws that are specifically about accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units. There are also dozens of housing bills that I've read through, and several of them are going to have very big impacts on your ADU projects. So we're going to talk about those too in this video. These bills have passed. Now I'm reading them and talking to experts in the field, land use attorneys, contractors, specialists, and I'm trying to figure out how these will actually work in the real world. Let's start with bills that are specifically about ADUs and junior ADUs. This is AB 1154. This is about junior accessory dwelling unit owner occupancy requirements. Most cities in California still require owner occupancy of some kind if you get a junior ADU permit. This bill says if you meet the right requirements, namely it has its own bathroom, it has its own sanitation facilities, then your junior ADU does not have owner occupancy requirements. That's a pretty important change because now you can have a primary house and then you add a junior ADU with its own bathroom, a conversion ADU of other existing space in the primary, and a detached ADU up to 800 square feet in the backyard. And now you're adding 3 independent units to a single family home without triggering any owner occupancy requirements. So that's really interesting. A lot of properties aren't going to support that many conversions and the detached unit, so don't, do it if it's gonna ruin your property. But occasionally you do find these big houses, maybe a 5-bedroom, and you go, actually, I could carve out part of the master suite, could become its own independent ADU conversion. I could convert the garage that's attached into a junior with its own bathroom, and then I've got a big backyard where I can put another unit and maybe some off-street parking or something like that, even if you don't have to do it, maybe you want to do it. If you've got that kind of property, that's really interesting, right? Because now you're adding 3 units to a single family property, and all using section 66323 of the government code, which is these statewide preemption ADUs that kind of bypass a lot of local rules that would otherwise prohibit the ADU's construction. Very interesting change. Okay, next we're going to talk about SB 9, not the one you're thinking of. This is about ADUs. They reuse the bill numbers a lot in Sacramento, so even though it's already famous as a bill from a previous session, this is SB 9 from the 2025 session, and it's about accessory dwelling units. Namely, it's about ADU ordinances. When your city adopts an ADU ordinance, it has to send that ordinance to the state to approve it. The state agency is called the HCD, Housing and Community Development, and they are supposed to approve the ordinance or review it and offer technical assistance and say, hey, you got to change these things because they're not compliant. If your city or county adopts an ordinance and fails to review it to the HCD within a certain number of days and respond and follow all these rules, the whole ordinance, according to this, becomes unenforceable. That's very interesting, right? Because it happens more often than you think. For example, the city of Glendale has received a notice of violation. They've been told by the HCD that their ordinance is not okay. It is unenforceable in the words of the HCD. There is a whole list of review letters on the HCD's website that you can read. 140 different cities and counties have received letters from the HCD about their ADU ordinances. And so you can check if your city's on that list. Then you can see whether they got a violation or whether they've been approved. This is interesting because if your city's code is unenforceable, you go to the state code. And the state code is very, very progressive. So for example, the state code does not have a height limit across the board on all ADUs. There's some language about height limits in the state code, but it doesn't say these are the rules. It says if a city wants to adopt height limits, This is the most prescriptive they're allowed to be. The state code itself has no height limit on ADUs. So if you go into a bucket where you're suddenly using the state code because the local code is unenforceable, Glendale, then actually you can build up to the underlying zoning height limit, which is often like a big two-story structure on a single-family lot. So that's really, really interesting. Now, there is a catch. That list of 140 cities that the HCD has published as towns and counties that have received ADU ordinance review letters, I made a spreadsheet because I was going to share it with you guys. And then while I'm sanity checking it, there are giant jurisdictions that are real goody two-shoes, like Sacramento, San Jose. I am sure that they have submitted an ADU ordinance for review, but they do not have an ordinance review letter published on the HCD website. What that says to me is that this list is not complete. Maybe there's a backlog at the HCD. Maybe they're not publishing giant letters. If it's just a like, thanks for submitting your review, it's your ordinance, it's great. I'm not sure what the deal is there. I'm looking into it. I will submit a bunch of Public Records Act requests, and if that's useful, I'll publish a video. Subscribers will see it pop up in the channel. If you need to find your city and your city isn't in that list of 140, and you're curious about this because it really impacts your project, you can submit a Public Records Act request. I'll put a link in the description below. It's free, and they'll answer within 10 days. And yeah, it's a little complicated, but it's worth it to find out if your city has an enforceable ADU ordinance or not, if it's going to make a big difference for your project, right? So we'll be submitting a bunch of PRA requests for the channel. If the results are useful, we'll publish a video about it, so subscribe. And we'll also be working with Senator Arreguín's office to figure out like, what's going on here, because obviously the HCD needs to respond when a municipality submits an ordinance, or else, you know, the shot clocks become meaningless. They have to be enforced in both directions, right? All right, there you go. There's a new SB 9 in town, and we'll be following up on it on the channel. Next, we'll talk about SB 543, which is supposed to be a boring rechaptering bill, but it turns out it's very exciting. The way the ADU and JADU code were adopted and rechaptered, they were slightly separated, and so sometimes a clause would only apply to ADUs, and then it would not apply to junior ADUs. They've reorganized all the information so that everything applies across the board now, which is kind of like usually not worth an update. However, they also clarified the definition of size. So instead of using just size, they now talk about interior livable space and interior habitable area. And those phrases matter a lot because depending on which phrase is being used, you measure things differently and you include and exclude different parts of the building. For example, do you count attics, basements, garages, exterior structures? All of that matters a ton. And even the exterior walls of your unit, whether they get counted towards your size or not, it's all clarified in the language of this bill. Furthermore, you can get clarification on how to calculate size of the ADU in the HCD Handbook, which I talk about all the time. And that brings me to the next bill, AB 413. They have translated the handbook into multiple languages. So now you can get it in Vietnamese and Chinese and Espanol. And obviously that's going to be really helpful because a lot of the people who are interested in building ADUs don't necessarily read English as a first language. So when you get into the detailed kinds of rules that we're talking about in this video, being able to print something out that's in your native language and handing it out to everybody in the family, multiple generations, it's going to be really useful. You know, I'm actually Vietnamese. A lot of the people who watch the channel are Asian, South Asian, Latino. So it's going to be super useful to have more translations from the HCD. Those are already published on the website, and good on them. I'm really glad we're going to be able to access this information in a variety of languages. Maybe I need to start a Vietnamese version of the channel. I'll also briefly mention AB 462, which passed earlier in the year. This is specifically about LA coastal zone rebuilds after the fires. This is pretty interesting, just as a tidbit, that when they pass all those streamlining laws to make rebuilding after the fires easier, they originally said like for like, so if you rebuild exactly what you had, then it's streamlined. they then passed this law that said, hey, also if you want to add an ADU in the coastal zone, here's some extra protections and streamlining to make it easier and faster. What's interesting is that when I looked at the data for the permits that have been submitted in the Palisades and in Altadena, what we saw is 10 to 15% of the new projects are including an accessory dwelling unit, which is really fascinating because it kind of says, you know, even in these tragic moments, the silver lining for homeowners who can afford to stay and rebuild is that they get to envision the home as they would like to live in it in the future. And 10 to 15% of the time, that's including an accessory unit. So it's a very different shape and size home. Very interesting, and my heart goes out to everybody who was affected by those fires, whether you lost a home or were just affected. And thank you for watching the channel. The other thing I will mention is AB 130. This was the budget bill that passed in the summer. That's when they adopt the budget in California. This bill included a couple things. It included a lot of great housing stuff, but it also included a couple ADU-specific things about San Francisco rent control and HOAs. So it's not worth going into everything, but there are some specific tidbits in AB 130 about that. Additionally, I'll just say briefly, AB 1061 is a bill about the old SB 9, the one that lets you split lots or do 2 units where you could only do 1 before. That bill originally said it could not be applied in historic districts, historic areas. This AB 1061 says SB 9 can now be used in historic areas. So that's an important update for people who are interested in SB 9, which isn't specifically ADU related, but there's a lot of overlap. Okay, with that, we can now go on to the other big chunk of rules, which aren't ADU specific. They're more like universal housing laws, but they'll have a big impact on ADU projects. So one of those in particular, which I alluded to at the top of the video on the basketball court, is AB 253. This will allow you, as a homeowner who's applying for a residential building permit, to hire a third party to do the plan check for you if the city or county take too long. This is a statewide change. It's very important. It's going to have a big impact and be very helpful on some ADU projects. And then on a lot of ADU projects, it's actually going to be relatively useless. And so we should talk about the details. We should talk about what I think is actually in this law. Then we're going to talk about how it might be applied in the real world and what the limitations of that are. And then we're going to talk about my theories about what common situations might come up where I think that this will be really useful. But it's all conjecture. This bill already went into effect. It doesn't wait until January like a lot of these laws do. So talk to a land use attorney about your specific situation. You might be interested in knowing what you can do. So my notes on what this law says, and they're just my notes. If a city or county takes longer than 30 days to review a complete application for a residential building permit, then you can hire a third-party plan checker to do it instead of the city or county. Then it defines who can do that third-party plan check. They have to be licensed architects or engineers in the state of California. They have to have a special certification at the IAPMO or ICC. And then it lays out a really specific process. So you have to tell the city that you're going to hire a third-party plan checker, wait a certain number of days, hire the person. That third party is going to do the plan check and then submit it in a specific way to the city. The city then has a certain amount of time. And hopefully the city says, great, or they say nothing, and in either case, your plans are deemed approved. On the other hand, the city can object in certain ways, and there's a whole process, right? All right, so that's what the law says. How is it going to work in practice? This law specifically defines local agency as a city or county. And the law is specifically designed for residential building permits. But the thing is, plan check is only one of the things you need to get for a residential building permit in almost every situation I've seen. For example, let's take the County of LA. Here's a referral sheet where you can see all the different departments that the county is asking you to go talk to for approvals. And in some of those cases, the department is part of the county, but in other cases, the department has nothing to do with the county. It's a local agency that sits outside the county. For example, you could have a water district, which is actually a local agency that does not belong to the county or the city. It does not report into the county or city sometimes. You can have a school district, which is set up completely differently. You can have a fire safety district or a fire marshal who does not necessarily report into the city or county that you're located in. So you could easily be in a situation where the thing that's holding you up isn't actually the plan check. It's one of these other components, and this law doesn't compel those other local agencies to do much. Having said that, there are a lot of situations where this law will help a ton. So for example, I went to this conference in Southern California, and there was a city manager who I'm not going to name because I don't want to make them commit to this thing that they said in a moment of honesty. That city manager from a relatively large jurisdiction in Southern California said that if a private individual could hire a plan checker to work for the city and take over the ADU permits, that would be amazing, right? This city manager does not have all the staff to handle the permits that come into their office within the 30 business days or whatever the shot clock is for that specific type of permit. And so in their eyes, they saw it as an amazing benefit if an individual was allowed to hire somebody to do the work for them, and that they saw it as a boon. For city managers like that, I can imagine using this law to really accelerate your project because you don't have to wait 30 business days. The law also says if the city just estimates that it can't do the plan check within 30 business days, that triggers the fact that you could go out and hire a third-party plan checker. So I could imagine putting a cover letter with my permit and copying that city manager in that one instance and saying, hey, dear city manager, I've submitted a completed application for an ADU. If you send me a letter that says you cannot guarantee that it will be, that plan check will be completed within 30 business days, that actually allows me to use this law to go hire a third-party plan checker. And I'd be happy to do that. That means you don't have to put staff time against my ADU project. Just tell me it's going to take more than 30 business days. If the city manager is willing to say that, then you go hire that third-party plan checker, and you've actually shrunk the timeline tremendously because you didn't even have to wait the 30 business days. So that's one use case that I'm hoping we see more and more, is cities kind of willingly opting into this third party doing it because, it's taking an expense off of the general funds of the city or the staff time of the city. That's really cool. Another place that this will be really helpful, I think, is that there are still a lot of jurisdictions out there that just ghost applicants for like 90 days at a time. It's not super common. It's not as prevalent as it used to be, but there are jurisdictions where you just won't hear from them for months. This makes it a little bit easier to kind of jostle them, right, and get them out of their stupor. Sometimes you're going to use the law just by referring to it, and you won't even have to hire a third-party plan checker. You just send a letter in that says, hey, haven't heard from you in 90 days, so I'm going to use AB 254 to go hire a third-party plan checker unless I hear from you, right? I'm going to do that in 10 days. And a lot of the time, I imagine that'll get the city out of its silence, and maybe they'll just say, oh, yeah, don't worry. Actually, we'll get it to you. I could imagine that, right? And in another kind of situation, maybe I'm in a jurisdiction that I know does not like my ADU project, and maybe they're a little feisty. Maybe they've already received a notice of violation from the HCD. And in that situation, maybe I don't want to be a squeaky wheel and give them opportunities. Maybe I just want to wait for them to break the rules and then hit them as hard as I can. And in that, we'll talk more about this in the next section about suing the suburbs, but there's different situations. And this is why I can't give advice for specific situations, because a land use attorney is going to tell you, oh, based on your project, here are the risks and rewards of letting the city know early versus telling the city after they've broken the rule versus whatever, all your options. One other thing worth mentioning is that there's this finite list of licensed architects and engineers with the right certification, and so I tried to go make that list, and I figured one of them might want to sponsor this video. Having said that, it interestingly, once I started scraping those lists, I realized that almost everybody who holds this certification currently works for a city or county or works for a firm that contracts to cities and counties. There's two problems with that. I will not bore you with the details, but I am working on a solution to get it so that firms are motivated to do a very fast, good job for the homeowner applicant in jurisdictions where they do not currently work. I will be working all that up and releasing another video when I have that. And so subscribe to the channel if you don't already. For the next batch of laws, we're gonna switch gears and we're gonna talk a little bit about suing the suburbs. Again, not legal advice. If you want legal advice, check out the sponsors of this section of the video in the link description below. That's an affiliate link to Ryan Patterson at Patterson O'Neill. They're land use attorneys who often work on YIMBY cases. They're great at giving advice about your specific situation. And if you've watched this deep in the video, then they know you know a lot more than the average homeowner. So it's much easier to schedule time with them if you use the affiliate link in the description below the video. All right, the next bill is AB 712, which you can see my crazy chicken scratch notes. I have a lot of thoughts about. So the basic concept here is that if you are applying for a housing permit and you sue the city or the county, then you are entitled to get attorney fees and costs back at the end of the case, which wasn't always true about individual ADU cases, depending on who you ask. And so it kind of reduces some of the exposure in certain situations, talk to a real lawyer, of suing the city. Furthermore, if the city is already on the naughty list, remember I mentioned Glendale has already received a notice of violation about their ADU ordinance, then they're subject to extra fines that they have to pay directly to affordable housing, to the state. And that can be really interesting because it changes the conversation. If you go in and sue a large city, like Glendale's got a couple 100,000 people, I think it's got $1 million plus budget for its legal fees and attorneys, staff, and stuff like that. When you go and say, hey, I'm gonna sue you, as an individual homeowner with only one project and it's one unit, a lot of the time, the city attorney is not gonna be very scared of that. And if they're asked at all by the city council, they'll say like, well, you know, the risk is X, and it might be a really small number. In other situations where they're facing hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines if they lose the case, and they're also subject to pay your attorney fees, that conversation might shift, right? Because now they'll say, well, actually, there's a high risk that we could lose this case because it's pretty open and shut. We missed the shot clock, or we did something we shouldn't have done, and the HCD's already told us we shouldn't do it. They go, there's a pretty high risk we lose the case. We'd be on the hook for all of their attorney fees, and they hired a pretty expensive attorney, and we're on the hook for all these fines. And the fines multiply every time too, which is also interesting. So all in all, they might start saying, actually, there's a lot of risk here to this large amount of money. And at that point, in some situations, it will become much more likely for the city to say, you know what, this isn't worth the trouble. Let's just give this one individual their permit and make this whole case go away, or make the threat of this case go away. And so that might be really interesting in some situations. I would note that this law about suing cities combines interestingly with the shot clock rules, because it creates a sort of no-brainer situation where you can clearly show that 30 business days have passed since a permit has been submitted. And if you were completely ghosted by the city and you have this paperwork trail, one can imagine a carrot and stick approach in some situations where I might say, hey, on the one hand, I'm willing to pay for my own plan check, and I already have. And on the other hand, if you say that that plan check doesn't count, I am willing to sue you, and you might have to pay my attorney fees, plus maybe all these extra fines. You can imagine there's some situations where these combine interestingly. Furthermore, there's this bill, SB 786. I will not go into all the details, but this is AG Bonta bringing the hammer, and there just are a lot of ramifications for court cases that go on too long, and ultimately, it raises some questions in my mind, like, hey, could we decertify whole housing elements if a city is not handling ADU permits promptly enough? So that's an interesting question. I don't want to bog down the channel because it gets very wonky, and nobody needs that level of detail before they talk to a real attorney about their specific situation. But that's interesting. And then also, SB 489, this is another Arreguín bill, and this one is a sleeper, but it means so much to me personally and ADU developers like you. What happens a lot of the time in California is that you run into what's called a local agency that is not the city or county. We talked about this briefly at the top with the third-party plan check, but local agencies can be like water districts, water corporations, utilities, entities. So these are all kind of mysterious entities in a lot of different parts of California, especially the rural parts. What happens is there's a group called a LAFCo, can't make this stuff up, that stands for Local Agency Formation Commission. And the LAFCos are supposed to do things like determine the boundaries of cities and jurisdictions and form these local agencies that handle things like water or sometimes waste management, things like that. So what happens though is these agencies then aren't really responsible to anybody, and they sometimes operate like little kingships, right? I've spoken to clients who are trying to develop an accessory dwelling unit, but they have to go into this LAFCo formed water district, for example, and they tell the water district, hey, I have the right to build this ADU. Look, the state rules say XYZ. I have the water hookup already for my primary home. And the district says, I don't care what the state rules say. You have to submit this application that is not available anywhere online, and you have to come beg for mercy from our commission in person. I'm exaggerating, but I'm not exaggerating. These entities are often so entitled that they just act like they don't report into anybody, that they're not accountable to citizens. This bill just requires a lot more transparency about these LAFCos. If they have an application process, they have to put that online. They have to give examples of complete applications, just basic stuff that we expect out of transparent government institutions. This bill is saying, hey, time to shape up. And again, it combines with some of these other rules about Sue in the suburbs in interesting ways, where eventually we're going to get more and more transparency about the LAFCos, and then more and more transparency about the entities that they form, the local agencies that they commission. And then we're going to learn how to get our projects approved. Because that's the goal here, right? We just want transparency. We want to know the rules ahead of time. I'll briefly mention AB 920. This is a law that says cities over a certain size, I think it's 150,000 people, need to put all their application processes online by the year 2030 or something like that. It's in the future, but it's a good bill. We should have all these processes online. You shouldn't have to drive into the city hall with your plans. It's the year 2025 of our Lord. All right, and then lastly, this video got too long, but I gotta celebrate SB 79 and all of the amazing reform that passed this year that didn't make it into this video. We're gonna build so much more housing at all levels of affordability. We're gonna build it in the smartest places, near mass transit, where people will be having a better life, a richer life. It's good for the environment, it reduces traffic, it reduces pollution, it reduces road dangers for pedestrians and our communities. I'm so proud of everything we've accomplished this year as a YIMBY movement, and I'm especially excited that one of our housing champions, the guy who authored SB 79 and started a lot of this movement in many ways, Senator Scott Wiener, he's going to be running for Congress. This is not a political channel, but when a housing hero like that is going to the nationals, that's a really exciting time, and I wish him the best. So thank you all for watching. I hope you have a lot of luck with your ADU. Let's build some housing.